Fighting games have a storied legacy more than most other genres. They have long-standing series with extremely dedicated fans that stick together through decades, to a point where mechanics and terminology are now universally relevant to all games of this type, like notations for frame data and controller inputs. It can be intimidating in the face of the long history of these games for new players to break into the fold. Some believe that the genre as a whole is inaccessible to casual players, and that competitive fighting game players tend to be exclusionary or toxic.
Oh my gosh.
Overly competitive and unfriendly fighting game players definitely exist, but that shouldn't stop anyone from having fun playing casual matches with their friends. I've personally always thought that fighting games can be considered cooperative in the way that you and your opponent are working together in order to jointly explore the game's mechanics, test the limits of your characters, and choreograph exciting battles between cool and well-animated characters. I think it's for this reason that fighting games also generally have a lot of creativity and artistry in character designs, music, art, and animation, things that even someone completely uninitiated could appreciate. Ideally, watching professional level gameplay is where a fighting game shines the brightest, showing off the best of what the game has to offer by seeing players pulling off difficult to execute techniques in fluid consideration and reaction with their opponent. Street Fighter largely established the baseline that many other fighting games would take notes from. Games like Virtua Fighter, Tekken, and Soul Edge, which would later become Soul Calibur, explored innovative ideas, transitioning to a 3D arena while sticking to the general formula established by 2D fighters. Now, all sorts of radically disparate variations of the age-old fighting game formula are available for all sorts of players, and some developers have made games so far from convention that they serve as a reminder to fans that there are infinite possibilities for creativity using the basic framework of two characters trying to get each other's HP to 0. Divekick, for example, is an indie fighter controlled using only 2 buttons, but still manages to be strategically complex, inviting players to explore the surprisingly wide breadth of possibilities in battles between 2 characters with 2 buttons each. Another indie fighter, Skullgirls, showed that a small development team with a limited budget is capable of producing a fully fledged and competent fighting game that appeals to traditionalist fighting game players. It's faithful to the unforgiving, fast-paced, and unrelentingly strategic nature of 2D fighters, and rewards long-time players who have become comfortable with the relevant set of skills. The downside of this is that a new player who thinks that Skullgirls might be a good gateway into the genre will probably be disappointed to find the high level of execution expected of them to successfully string together a combo, and moreover disappointed trying to fluidly execute combos in a match. The game has comprehensive tutorials and training options, but at the end of the day, it's best suited for people who have prior experience playing this type of game. An overzealous new player might queue online only to feel discouraged by becoming stuck in long cutscene combos and pressure strings with no concept of how to get the upper hand on their opponent, who has likely been playing this game for hundreds of hours. In contrast, Guilty Gear Strive is an incredibly beginner-friendly fighting game. It was a huge step forward in the Guilty Gear series and a landmark title for the accessibility of the fighting game genre. It maintains the mechanical complexity expected by audiences while changing the 2D fighter formula, hopefully enough to be inviting for beginners. There are 3 things in particular that I want to highlight as making this game beginner-friendly: short combos, hitstop, and simple motion inputs. One of the most frustrating things for new players is the feeling of having no control for extended periods of time, but in Strive, combos against either wall will eventually break that wall, resetting both players to a neutral position. You also start every match with a full burst meter, which can be used to interrupt your opponent's combos. So long as you have burst, you always have an extremely powerful defensive option. Hitstop is a common term used to describe how when you land an attack, both characters freeze for a short moment, giving players breathing room to think about what just transpired and decide how to follow up. Fact is, if a fighting game uses little or no hitstop, it's much more difficult to confidently control your character. Hitstop benefits the player, but also serves to improve the spectating experience, giving battles more weight and making a clear distinction between attacks that miss and attacks that land. Motion inputs are instructions for attacks that require multiple directional inputs to execute. For example, the motion input for Ryo's Hadouken in Street Fighter is famously down, down, forward, forward, forward punch. These need to be inputted in quick succession to successfully execute the move. Some ask, what exactly is added to a game by including motion inputs? Does it set a barrier of entry that is too high for casual players? Super Smash Bros. Is probably the most renowned example of a fighting game without motion inputs. Another notable example is Rising Thunder, a cancelled free-to-play fighting game that was released in 2015. It was made by Radiant Entertainment, founded by twin brothers Tom and Tony Cannon, fighting game veterans largely responsible for the creation of the Evolution Championship Series, one of the largest fighting game tournaments in the world. Needless to say, it was meticulously designed with long-time fighting game enthusiasts in mind. But could a game without motion inputs be truly accepted by professional fighting game players? Maybe not, evidenced by the game's cancellation, but we'll come back to that in a bit. Strive struck a balance by including motion inputs, but move lists are short and simple, and the game is very generous with the ability to buffer directional inputs much easier than in most other similar games. These accessibility changes to classic fighting game system mechanics definitely mark a departure from traditionalism, to the dismay of some veterans. But for the most part, I think that the fighting game genre as a whole is heading in a similar direction, following the success of Strive. The age-old question that developers in the fighting game genre have only recently begun to properly answer is, how can we lower the barrier of entry so that more people will be less intimidated to try and play fighting games casually? And how do we avoid oversimplifying the things that made fighting games so engaging in the first place? Strive is a huge step in the right direction, and I get a similar impression of Street Fighter 6, which is coming soon. This new iteration of Street Fighter is making clear attempts to ease new players into the core of the strategic gameplay, and the same could be said from what we've seen of the further upcoming Tekken 8. These new fighting games that try to soften the intimidating nature of the genre's traditional mechanical complexity feel like the most modern examples of the genre we've ever seen, and their accessibility deserves to be celebrated. In the same vein, Rising Thunder was ahead of its time, a leap forward in terms of ease of access in mechanically complex fighting games. So why was it cancelled? Well, the well-respected veterans that led Radiant Entertainment, Tom and Tony Cannon, were acquired by Riot and given a fat paycheck to make the League of Legends fighting game known currently as Project L. Development diaries about the game have been gradually released that emphasize the game's commitment to lowering the barrier of entry. The team also commits to smooth online play in these diaries. Say what you will about Riot Games, but they have a lot of positive excitement for Project L, and I'm eager to see what the finished game will look like. If you're interested in video games in a general sense, even if fighting games have always seemed like something inaccessible to you, I think that the new wave of modern fighting games will be a good opportunity for you to dip your toes into one of gaming's longest standing genres. I'm convinced at this point that fighting games in this specific style will always be relevant, willing to adapt to the trends of the times and simultaneously retain the fandom of those who have been dedicated to the genre for decades. And if you're still unconvinced and unwilling to spend $30 or $60 on a fighting game, I'll leave you with another recommendation. Your Only Move is Hustle is an online multiplayer fighting game available for $5 on Steam. Seeing the game is bound to be initially confusing, but the gist of it is this. It's a turn-based fighting game with elements inspired by tool-assisted speedruns. Without consideration of the fact that the game pauses in between turns, it basically plays like any other fighting game. You can choose from a list of attacks or movement options, or try to predict your enemy's aggression and block or dodge their attacks. You have the advantage of seeing a prediction of how your actions and your opponents will play out in the next turn. It turns the traditional formula for fighting games into something more like chess, where you'll need to read your opponent, get inside their head, and be able to think one step ahead of them in order to win the battle.
The game is fun.
Many avid fighting game players would assert that every fighting game is turn-based, which is especially true once you enter high-level play. Playing Yomi Hustle can help players to understand the fast-paced back-and-forth mind games that occur in every fighting game while removing the physical dexterity required to perform precise controller inputs. Up until this point, I've intentionally only shown you how the game plays in real time, but it especially shines in the replays after the battle. I'd like to end this video leaving you with some of my favorite replays that I've accumulated since playing the game. Check it out and check out more fighting games. I swear to God it's worth it.